You were already walking away when it started. You remember the moment, not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. Someone said something, and something in your chest tightened, and before you could stop yourself, you were already replaying it. In the car, in the shower, at 2 in the morning, lying still while your mind ran the argument again, sharper this time. All the things you should have said landing perfectly in an imaginary version of the conversation that was never going to happen. Nobody saw any of that. That's the part nobody talks about. The visible moment lasted maybe 30 seconds. The invisible cost ran for days. And here's what makes it worse. You already knew, somewhere underneath all of it, that the person wasn't worth it. That the thing they said didn't actually matter. That you were spending something real on something that wasn't. You knew. And you did it anyway. That's not weakness. That's not a character flaw. That's something older than you. A pattern that was running before you were old enough to question it. And until you see it clearly, it will keep running. That's where this video starts. If you found this channel, and this is your first time here, what we do here is not motivation. Motivation tells you what to do. What we do is show you why you keep doing what you already know you shouldn't. That's a different conversation. If that's the conversation you want, subscribe now. Because what's coming in the next few videos is going to go somewhere most channels won't follow. There's a version of you that moves through the world without bleeding energy in every direction. Not cold, not closed off, just solid. The kind of solid where someone can come at you sideways and you don't flinch. Not because you're pretending, but because you genuinely don't need to. Where your peace isn't dependent on other people behaving the way you need them to. Where you stop paying the invisible tax that reactive people pay every single day without realizing it. That version of you is not a fantasy. It's not reserved for a different kind of man. But getting there requires something most self-development content won't ask of you. It requires you to look at the pattern, not just the behavior. To go one level deeper than just stop reacting. Because you've already tried that. And you know that trying to stop reacting without understanding why you're reacting doesn't work. It holds for a week, maybe 2, and then someone says the exact right thing in the exact right tone, and you're back inside it before you even noticed you entered. So let's start there, with why. When you were young, and this will feel more specific than it should, you learned something about attention. Not in a classroom, not from a book. You learned it from watching what happened when you expressed certain things. When you got upset and it worked. When you stayed quiet and got overlooked. When you pushed back and something shifted or didn't. You were running experiments without knowing you were running them. And whatever the results were, you built a strategy around them. A way of operating that made sense in the environment you were in. The problem is that strategy is still running. Right now. In your adult life. In your relationships. Your professional situations. Your interactions with people who have nothing to do with where that strategy came from. When someone challenges you and you feel the immediate need to defend yourself. That's not a response to them. That's a response to something much older. When you go quiet in certain rooms and immediately feel invisible, that's not about the room. When you over-explain to people who weren't asking for an explanation, that's not about the conversation you're in. The patterns predate the situations, and you are running them without a director. Here's the question that sits underneath all of this, and I want you to actually stop for a moment with it, not skip past it. What do you believe happens to you if you don't react? Not what you think happens. What you believe at the level underneath thinking. Because most men who struggle with reactivity aren't reacting because they think it will help. They're reacting because something inside them believes that not reacting is the same as disappearing, as losing, as being the kind of person who just gets walked over. That belief is the engine. The reaction is just the exhaust. And until that belief gets examined, not fought, not suppressed, examined, no tactical advice about silence or non-reaction will stick. Because you'll be trying to override a belief with behavior, and beliefs are always stronger than behaviors in the long run. Always. Drop your answer to this in the comments. What's the thing you react to most that you already know isn't worth it? Not to share, to name it. Because naming it is the first move. Now, let's talk about what's actually on the other side. There's a concept that nobody teaches men because it doesn't fit neatly into advice. It's more of a recognition than a skill. The recognition that your internal state is not determined by external events. That seems obvious when you read it. It is not obvious in practice. Most people, if you watch them closely, are living in a kind of permanent negotiation with the world around them. Someone is kind to them, they feel good. Someone is dismissive, they feel bad. Someone respects them, they feel solid. Someone undermines them, they wobble. Their internal state is tracking external inputs in real time, like a stock ticker reacting to the market. And because the world is unpredictable, because people are inconsistent, because circumstances shift, their internal state is also unpredictable, inconsistent, dependent. What the most psychologically grounded people develop, over time and usually through difficulty, is a different architecture, one where external events still land. They're not numb, they're not pretending, but where those events don't automatically run the internal world, where there's a space between what happens and how they respond, a gap. And in that gap is where choice lives. The Stoics understood this with a precision that still holds. They called it the dichotomy of control, the strict distinction between what is yours and what isn't, what you can govern and what you cannot, what exists inside your boundary and what falls outside it. They weren't teaching indifference, they were teaching precision, the discipline of knowing exactly what is worth your energy and refusing to spend it anywhere else. Other people's behavior is not yours. Their words are not yours. Their opinions, their moods, their choices about whether to respect you or undermine you, none of that is yours. What is yours is your response, your attention, your internal state. And most people spend their entire lives governing everything that isn't theirs, while the thing that actually is theirs, their own inner world, runs without anyone at the wheel. That's not a moral failure. It's a design problem. Nobody taught you to govern yourself because the world largely runs on people who don't. But here's where it gets more uncomfortable. And this is the layer most content stops just short of. The reason the Stoic insight doesn't land for most people isn't that they disagree with it. They agree completely. They read it, they nod, they feel momentarily clear. And then 3 days later, someone says something and they're back in the same reactive loop. Not because the insight was wrong, because there's a layer underneath the insight that the insight alone doesn't touch. Your reactions are protecting something. That's what nobody tells you. The defensiveness, the need to respond, the urge to explain yourself, those are not random. They are guarding something that you have decided somewhere below conscious thought is fragile. Something about who you are that you believe cannot survive being questioned or dismissed or ignored. And as long as that thing feels fragile, as long as you need external confirmation to feel solid, you will keep reacting. Because the reaction isn't the problem, it's the symptom. The problem is the fragility underneath. And this is where it gets useful. Because the goal is not to become someone who doesn't react. Reaction is human. The goal is to become someone whose foundation is solid enough that reactions become a choice rather than a reflex. Someone who can be challenged, dismissed, questioned, and ignored, and remain intact. Not because they don't feel it, but because their sense of themselves doesn't depend on how the moment resolves. That's not a posture. That's not something you perform. It's something you build. And you build it by doing something most men spend their lives avoiding. You look clearly at the thing you've been protecting, and you ask whether it actually needs that much defending. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time, the thing underneath the reaction is a belief about yourself that was handed to you by someone who didn't know you well enough to hand you anything. A version of yourself that you accepted without examining. A standard that someone else set, and that you've been trying to meet for years without ever asking if it was a standard worth meeting. When you start to see that, really see it, not just intellectually understand it, something shifts. Not overnight, but it shifts. Here's where most people think the video ends. They've got the insight. They understand the pattern. They know the Stoic framework. They feel for a moment like they have the answer. And I want to give you that feeling for exactly 10 seconds, because it's real. You do have part of it. But here's the level underneath. Understanding the pattern doesn't change anything by itself. Insight without application is just more content. And here's the thing that's actually hard to hear. If you've consumed a lot of material like this, and you probably have, because you're here, and you still find yourself reacting in the same ways, that's not because you haven't found the right insight yet. It's because insight was never going to be enough. Because knowing why you do something and changing what you do are two completely separate acts. And most people stop at the first one and wonder why nothing is different. The actual work is behavioral. It is accumulated, daily, small, and it is boring in the way that real things are boring before they compound. It is choosing in the actual moment to not send the response, to not explain when you don't owe an explanation, to let the silence sit without filling it, to let someone think whatever they're going to think without making it your emergency. Not because you've transcended caring, but because you've decided that the cost of reacting is higher than the cost of letting it go. Every time you make that choice, the gap between stimulus and response gets slightly wider. The reflex gets slightly slower. The foundation gets slightly more solid. Not from understanding. From doing, that's the work. And it is not dramatic. And nobody will see most of it. Now, let's talk about something more precise. Because understanding yourself is only part of this. The other part is understanding everyone else. There is a level of social intelligence that most men never develop. Not because they're not capable, but because nobody teaches it explicitly. And developing it requires a kind of uncomfortable honesty about human nature that most people prefer to avoid. People are not primarily driven by what they say they're driven by. This is not cynicism. This is observation. Watch people long enough. Not what they claim, but what they actually do, what they respond to. What moves them, what they protect. And a different picture emerges from the one they present. Most people who challenge you are not actually interested in the argument. They're interested in the reaction. The argument is a vehicle. The reaction is the destination. Which means responding to the argument misses the point entirely. You're engaging the stated content while ignoring the real dynamic. And when you engage the surface, you lose even when you win. The man who understands this stops fighting arguments. He starts reading the game underneath the argument. And once you can see the game, it loses most of its power over you. Because you can't be baited by a hook you can see. This is the layer that the most effective people in any room operate from. They are not the loudest. They are frequently not the most vocal. But they are the ones who understand what's actually happening, while everyone else is reacting to what appears to be happening. They have learned to read the difference between what someone says they want and what they actually want. Between the stated grievance and the real one. Between the performance of confidence and the fragility underneath it. And because they can read that, because they have developed that kind of precision, they can move differently. Not reactively, strategically. They know when to engage and when to let something collapse under its own weight. They know which battles are worth fighting and which ones are designed to drain them. They know that not every provocation is an attack and not every silence is acceptance. Here's one of the most useful things in this video, and I want you to actually remember it. The people who try hardest to provoke a reaction from you are the ones who are most dependent on your attention for their own sense of power. The provocation is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of need. They need you to react because your reaction is what makes them real in that moment. Your non-reaction doesn't just deprive them of satisfaction. It reveals something about the dynamic that they were counting on you not to see. Silence is not absence. Strategic silence, the deliberate, chosen decision to not engage, is a statement. A clear one. It says, "You don't affect my internal world enough to warrant a response." That is not dismissal. It is precision. And precision is one of the most disorienting things you can offer someone who is expecting chaos. Your presence itself becomes different when you stop being predictably reactive. Not in a way you announce, in a way people feel. There's a quality that develops in a man who has genuinely stopped needing external events to tell him who he is. A groundedness, a lack of urgency, a kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, but density. People feel it before they can name it, and they respond to it. Not because you've manipulated anything, but because you've stopped performing, and most people have never been in a room with someone who isn't. Make yourself something that has to be earned, not as a tactic, as a natural consequence of understanding your own value. When your time and attention are genuinely allocated based on what deserves them, not on who's demanding them most loudly, something shifts in how people relate to you. The people who were taking you for granted start noticing. The ones who were treating your presence as a default start to feel the difference. And the ones who actually deserve you will show up differently too, because they can feel that they're dealing with someone who chose to be there, not someone who just defaulted to presence. This is not manipulation. Manipulation is creating a false impression. This is the opposite. It's letting reality be real. If your attention has value, it should reflect that. If your presence matters, it shouldn't be perpetually ambient. The most influential people you will ever encounter are not the most available. They are the most intentional. There's a practical reality underneath all of this that almost nobody talks about directly, and I think it's the most important one. You cannot build the version of yourself we've been describing while simultaneously maintaining relationships and environments that continuously drain the foundation you're trying to build. Not everyone in your life is compatible with who you're becoming. That's not a dramatic statement. It's just true. Some people in your environment, not because they're evil, not because they're your enemies, are structurally dependent on you remaining reactive, on you needing approval, on you being someone whose foundation can be moved. Because if your foundation can't be moved, certain dynamics no longer function, certain roles no longer apply. And some people, faced with that, will unconsciously or consciously try to pull you back. Not maliciously, just protectively for themselves. Recognizing that is not paranoia, it's clarity, and you don't need to announce it or confront it. You just need to be honest with yourself about where your energy is going and what it's producing. The people who add to what you're building deserve more of you. The environments that drain it deserve less, regardless of how long they've been in your life or how guilty it feels to create that distance. You cannot fill every cup from an empty one. And the work of becoming someone psychologically solid enough to be genuinely useful to the people who deserve you requires protecting the resource that makes that possible: your energy, your attention, your inner stability. When was the last time you honestly asked yourself, who in my life is making me more? Not more successful, not more comfortable, more solid, more clear, more like the person you're actually trying to become. And when was the last time you acted on the answer to that question, even slightly? Leave that in the comments, not the comfortable version, the honest one. Here is where this lands. 7 principles, if you want to call them that, though they're really just one thing seen from 7 angles. Your attention is the most valuable thing you own. Not your time, not your skills, your attention, because wherever it goes, that is where your energy goes. And energy spent is energy gone. Every reaction you give to something unworthy is a withdrawal from an account that has limits. Start treating it accordingly. Silence is not retreat. It is often the most powerful statement available. When you respond to provocation, you confirm the provocation had power. When you don't, you reveal that it didn't. And that revelation hits harder than any response you could have crafted. Make your presence something worth arriving at. Not through scarcity as a game, but through genuine intentionality. Be fully there when you're there. Don't be everywhere for everyone. Let what you bring mean something, including to yourself. Your non-reaction is your clearest statement of power. Not passivity, not suppression. The deliberate choice to not be moved by what is not worth being moved by. Practice it. Build the gap. It is a skill, not a trait. Know what your energy produces and allocate accordingly. Not every relationship, Not every environment, not every demand on your time deserves the same access to you. The most precise thing you can do is get honest about what's building you and what's draining you, and let that honesty determine your decisions. Build an internal architecture that does not require external permission to stand. This is the work, slow, daily, undramatic. The gap between who you are and who you're becoming is crossed one moment at a time. One choice not to react, one explanation not given, one piece of silence held while everything in you wanted to fill it. And finally, the most powerful move in many situations is no move at all. Strategic stillness, the discipline of knowing when the situation will resolve itself if you simply refuse to feed it. Not every battle is worth your full force. The man who knows which battles to fight and which to simply outlast is not weak. He is precise, and precision conserves everything you need for the moments that actually matter. None of this is a destination. That's the thing most people miss when they consume content like this. They treat it as if there's a point of arrival, a level of psychological development where it gets easy and stays easy. There isn't. The work continues. The patterns resurface. The old reflexes find new situations to attach to. But something does change, and it's not that the world becomes simpler. It's that you become more honest about what it is. You stop expecting people to behave the way they should and start seeing them as they are. You stop reacting to what you wish were true and start responding to what's actually there. And in that shift, from illusion to precision, something settles. Not peace as an absence of difficulty. Peace as a ground you stand on while difficulty happens around you. That's where you're headed. Not some idealized version of yourself that doesn't feel things. A version of yourself that feels them without being governed by them. That moves through the world without needing it to constantly confirm who you are. You're not building this for the people who are currently underestimating you. You're building it for every room you walk into after this. Every conversation where you used to leave feeling like you gave something away and got nothing back. Every moment where someone tried to move you and found solid ground instead. The version of you that doesn't need to prove anything is not something you find. It's something you build, quietly, consistently, one choice at a time. There's a next conversation that follows directly from this one, about what happens when you've done the internal work and the external world still isn't reflecting it back. Why the gap between who you've become and what your life shows can persist longer than it should, and what that gap is actually telling you. That's the next video. And if this one reached the level it was supposed to, you already know you need to see it. You're building something. Don't let people who aren't building anything tell you how long it's supposed to take.